Sorry, wrong tape.
So we're joined today by somebody that you'll hear is one of our brothers from the north, actually from one of my favorite cities. I had one of my favorite vacations ever in Vancouver.
Is it, eh?
It sure is. You know, I'll tell you all about it.
Let's keep this going.
No do to boot it.
We'll get some Timbits and a large coffee.
That went over my head. That went completely over my head. I don't know Canadians that well.
Oh, come on.
It's like Tim Hortons and some
Tim
donuts.
Hortons, yeah, you got
and,
Tim Hortons.
put
It's
on
a donut shop, and they have coffee. So the Timbits are the donut holes.
Yes.
It's like Timbits and coffee.
All right.
Yeah. It's like you're not a Canadian if your trunk doesn't have, a bunch of winter toques and a couple of hockey sticks. That's how you know you're a Canadian.
I like Canadians. I think you guys are nice.
We are nice.
All that to say that we have our Vancouver film producer, and that happens to be his Instagram handle. So John at Vancouver Film Producer is going to tell us about watches and films, his total rabbit hole experience with Seikos and other brands.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly.
I'd say so, yeah. And he's going to be joining us on the call-in, so you'll notice he sounds a little different than we do.
A little bit, yeah. But you know what? We're going to do our best to make him sound delicious.
Well,
That would be great.
You can't make him sound un-Canadian.
Well,
No.
That was a
That's
low
an
blow.
impossibility.
That was a low blow. But you know what? We're not all perfect. So
Certainly not.
yeah, so Jonathan, with that, you perfectly imperfect human being,
Thank you.
welcome to On Time.
Thank you for having me.
So before we go any further, why don't you go ahead and take this opportunity to introduce yourself?
On Instagram, I'm Vancouver Film Producer, and I did that because it used to be just like John Schwartz 82 or whatever it was, and a bunch of people from my old high school days and stuff like that were contacting me and saying like, you have all this crap, why are you putting this up on the internet? It's not cool. And I said, okay, I really need to stop having people sort of know who I am by name online. So I did, I guess, the next stupidest thing, which was just put my career on there and where I'm living. I didn't think this one out, really.
I think you're doing fine. I mean, you're kind of this mysterious character. It's kind of hard to find your name with Vancouver Film Producers. So I think you're doing all right.
Yeah, it was fun. Like I had this really small, my account is really small in terms of comparison to like people that I talk to and sort of have become friends with. But I had a really, in the beginning, it was super small, 50 people and a couple people I worked with and some friends, and then a couple of sort of second level internet friends that just kind of followed me. And then I posted this photo, which had a bunch of watches and some Louis Vuitton stuff and a bottle of Tylenol. Tylenol, never leave home without it. And Tylenol, liked it. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then all of a sudden, my little 50 follower account had like 400 likes on that picture. And I was like, oh man, this is kind of cool. And, people were writing me and then more people followed me. And I think I'm up to like 7 something now, which isn't spectacular, but it's fun. I do it for fun. Everything I kind of do is for fun. It's all sort of tongue in cheek. And I'm not the most serious guy about anything. My job is too stressful to have everything in my life be a stress. So watches to me just represents a time in my day that I can sort of forget all of my work stuff and, come home and just troll the internet looking for other watches and other new, old, cool stuff and whatever's out there. And I learn something every day. I find something new every day that I never knew existed. And that to me is a good hobby to be in.
I completely agree with you, but I'd be curious to hear, how did you find watches? If there was a particular event with a lot of our guests that we've spoken to, or just people in general that got into this hobby, I would say, if I had to guess, like Family Feud, the number one response is they inherited a piece and they fell in love with it. And then they realized there are other really awesome pieces out there that strike their fancy. And it was just through the looking glass, as they say, or down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I would definitely fall into that category. And I do fall into it. My parents are not watch people at all. My father never wore a watch. I was not brought up in watches. It was nothing that I ever thought of or looked for. And then my grandfather passed away and I was handed down his Seiko. And it's a quartz Seiko. By any stretch of the imagination, it's nothing special. It's special to me, but certainly to no one else. It's kind of the watch that if you were looking on eBay for Seiko and went like lowest priced first, that would probably come up. But to me, it was everything, It was like the watch that he wore before he passed away. And it was the watch that I wore to my wedding. It was the watch that I wore when my 2 kids were born. I'd say it's the most important thing that I own. So I had this watch and I would wear it to all my special occasions. I would occasionally wear it to work sometimes. And it felt good to wear it. To me, it represented family. It represented someone in my life who was very important to me. And then I had a partner who was wearing, he wears Patek. And I was like, hey, what's that? And he goes, oh, it's this, it's a Patek or Patek, however you want to call it. And I sort of looked at the dial in the watch and I said, oh my God, like, this is like real. This is serious. Like, how much could this be? Like $4 or $5 or something? And he just was like, you're insane. And then that sort of got me down the rabbit hole. And I obviously couldn't afford to buy anything like that. I was a struggling filmmaker and trying to rationalize, what watch do I want to buy for myself, my first real watch that would hopefully be passed down to my son and his kids, that they could also have that feeling that I had when I got my grandfather's watch. So the watch that I chose to buy, and I bought it at Feldmar, was a Speedmaster. And I chose it because of my love of history. And I thought it was a significant watch. At the time when I bought it, I think I had, if my wife hears this, she'll probably kill me, but I think I had like $6,000 in my bank. And I think it was 4,700. It was like something stupid like that. I just made a decision that probably financially was really stupid. But for me, I had to do it. I had to buy that watch. I still have it. It's something that I'll never, ever sell. But it was the watch that got me down the rabbit hole, because once I took that watch home and cracked open the box and looked through the papers and did all those things that probably no one really ever does, like whoever takes the manual or any of that crap out, I did, and I read it all and I looked through it. And to me, I was like, okay, now I've bought this watch. And shortly after that, it was, well, what am I going to buy next? And that was sort of the start for me.
It sounds very similar to something that I heard about when they used to have, it was called the DARE program, and they called that a gateway drug.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, I remember DARE very well.
I do too, unfortunately. Yeah. I actually have a question that I guess goes back to the beginning of your story. And if you don't mind my asking, how old were you when you inherited the Seiko?
I was 15.
Okay.
I grew up in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
My grandparents were in Montreal. So I really saw them, I would say 5 to 6 times a year if we were lucky. And then he had cancer and he passed away and we went to Montreal. I remember I was working in a restaurant, I guess, dishwashing. I got the text on my Motorola StarTAC. 911, come home. And I was like, oh my God. So we took the car and drove out to Montreal. And luckily I was there before he passed away. So that was significant. And he handed it to me from his, like he was wearing it in the hospital. So it was kind of the last thing that I got from him. I think that's sort of what made it so special. I think if it was handed to me 5 months later, it might just be another thing, if that makes any sense. It just...
No, it absolutely does make sense.
And the best part about it was I had always associated Seiko with kind of bargain basement, super cheap. You can buy them in any store. And to me, was the best part of that watch was that learning that, sure, go try and find a 6119 7160 sport diver with a sushi roll in mint condition from 69. Go find that. Or find like a nice 1-button chronograph with the Asian Games insignia on the back. Find that. And then come to me and tell me that it's easier or cheaper or much more lowbrow than your brand new Rolex President. To me, I like the obscure. I like things that very few people have. I do have a lot of new watches that I buy and I wear, but I'm certainly not proud of them. I don't feel any sense of pride if I put on my, Hulk Submariner or my Batman. That is just another watch to me. But when I put on my 5164A with a Tiffany dial, now we're talking.
It's the search. It's finding something, like you said, that's obscure, that not the average Joe can find and possibly be afford.
100%. And it's not even about the money, because some of my most coveted watches were $200, $300. For me, if I go online and I'm looking to buy something, if I type it in eBay or if I type it in Watch Recon or something and a million come up, I just go to the next one. Like, I'm not even interested in it. And the rarity for me has always been a factor. I chase pieces that are not necessarily the most expensive piece. I chase something that I think is considered rare, considered unique, something that a small segment of the watch collecting community get excited about because we talk about these things. And a lot of my friends have pieces that I would kill to have, and they're probably worth $300, $400. And it has nothing to do with the money. And I think that's what makes watch collecting really spectacular, because so few people can go out and spend $200,000 on a Richard Mille. I can't do that. and I'm not even sure that I would if I could. It just doesn't excite me. And one of my friends who I haven't actually met personally, but who we talk all the time, Pierre Boyer, he's got 2 Richard Milles, and they're wicked, and they're great, and they're cool watches, but it's just not something that I would do.
I think you've touched on an interesting point, not only with this, but also with your 5164. And there's a difference between true rarity and what I call faux rarity, or it's basically made up rarity. And to be honest with you, I think that it's unfair to an actually rare piece, to a truly rare piece, or an uncommon piece, to put the 5164 in that category, because putting an additional stamp on the dial doesn't make it rare. It's still actually the same watch.
Yes. Does the Tiffany stamp make the watch different? No. It's the same watch. It's the same case, the same movement. The fact that you can't just walk into Tiffany and walk out with that watch, to me, makes it unique.
Got it. So it's the difficulty obtaining it. That's where you take your pride.
For sure.
I've been staring at Chase's watch this entire time, and I'll explain to you why. Maybe Chase, actually, maybe you should explain why, because this is, I'll give you some hints. It's got coaxial on the dial.
There's a shocker.
But it is a little bit different than you would traditionally see on a very suave gentleman.
Yeah, this is the current production, the current version of the one that everyone says, the James Bond watch. There are a couple things that make it different. It is, again, the current ceramic one, and it's black instead of blue, which I'm not sure if that's the last version. This may be the last version of the 300 that he wore before switching to the Planet Ocean.
That's a gorgeous watch. For me, Omega, I mean, obviously my Speedmaster is, means a lot to me. I don't know why this is, but as a filmmaker, I was never into Bond. It's an odd thing. It was just one of those franchises that whether my parents didn't introduce it to me early enough or whatever the story is, I was not really into it. So while I have a ton of respect for the guys that produce those films and everything that they do and what they've meant to cinema history, I don't gravitate to the James Bond of it all. And by the way, when I was in Florida recently, we went into the boutique, my wife and I, and we tried on the James Bond, and I was like, yeah, it's a cool watch. It's awesome. But it just didn't do very much for me personally. So I'm not super versed on the James Bond watches. I sort of go to the more obscure, like the weirder kind of watches in movies.
I actually have the same perspective. Me wearing this watch is more coincidental. I do like James Bond, but I don't buy watches because of their presence in a movie or because of some celebrity endorsement. It, quite frankly, makes the watch less appealing. On the other hand, I do think that this is an excellent watch. If somebody would ask me, and people have asked me, what is the best diving watch? They want a diving watch as their daily wear. This is the answer.
The movements are now becoming really second to none. What they're doing and putting in their watches are amazing. I think their marketing sucks.
Their marketing sucks, and also their product management. Their technical development is wonderful. Their product management is absolutely awful, and a lot of things they do as a company are really, really, really bad. But quite frankly, this is a watch that they made. I believe they developed the original one in the early 90s-ish, maybe even earlier. I think it was early 90s, though. And it's such a good design. I'm really glad they haven't screwed it up with their more recent product management. It's one of the most comfortable bracelets. The case design is not only aesthetic, but it's very ergonomic. There are a lot of good things I can say about the watch, and I don't even like diving watches. Everyone knows I'm really not a fan. This is probably the first diving watch that Mike's even seen me wear.
Well, it's weird. Like, I remember, being like a James Cameron fan, like those big Hollywood blockbusters that, as filmmakers, we all aspire to make, or we all aspire to work on those big shows that, 30, 40 years from now, someone will say, hey, you produced that movie. That was really special. I remember watching Aliens. For some reason, I would always go back to that movie as being one of my favorite films. It just sort of resonated with me. And then it was like a couple years ago, and I'm watching the movie, and I go, wait a second. Is she wearing a 7A28? Like, is she really wearing a Seiko speed timer? And she is.
So right now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to start talking about watches in movies. So Jonathan, can you give us some examples where you were watching a movie and you kind of have to scratch your head going, why is that watch in that movie?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's one that I totally understand why it's in the movie. I've had no success really finding a new old stock box and papers version of this. But in Ghostbusters, Spengler's wearing a voice note. I don't know if many people know what that watch is. It's kind of an obscure, weird, when you look at it, it kind of looks like the old Casio calculator watches, kind of funky. But, if you Google, Ghostbusters, Spengler, Seiko, you'll see that he's wearing a Seiko voice note. And that is so damn cool because in 84, that would have been sort of ahead of its time. It was funky looking watch, totally looks like it would be something that you'd go fight aliens wearing or ghosts wearing.
I think I know somebody who just got one.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. I promise you, when we finish, I will check on this.
Yeah, so that would be one. Like those 80s weird, I don't know, someone in Seiko was probably smoking too much or drinking too much and was like, we're going to do all these look how cool this is going to look. And while at the time, I'm not sure what people thought of them. I don't know how successful they were as, sellers. But certainly now, oh my God, I'd kill for those. Give me every Seiko 80s wacky quartz. Like even the, to go back on the James Bond thing, yeah, like not being the biggest Bond fan, but like you look at like the TV watch or like any of those really cool things. And I'm on eBay looking for those watches and I hate eBay so much, but you go down that rabbit hole where it's like all original. And then in the fine print in the bottom, like everything has been changed.
Yeah.
all original.
Those are great.
Yeah. So, I'm always on the lookout for those cool watches, just like in Running Man, he's wearing an H558, that would be another awesome Seiko watch that, he also wears G-Shocks in the movie too, but it's, 1987 and it's Schwarzenegger and he's wearing a Seiko. And you would think that he could probably put on anything, but that's the watch he was wearing. And I can guarantee you, working in the film business, the guys that are responsible for putting watches on actors are the props department. And the props department, maybe on those bigger films, are really paying attention to what watches people are wearing. But usually it's the actor's real everyday wearing watch because it's the only thing you can guarantee will be on their wrist every day.
That's actually what I was going to ask you. You said that the props department is responsible for the watches, although I'd heard from people that I know in the industry, they've always said that generally speaking, the watches that the actors are wearing are just their everyday watches and they're not given to them by the props department. So it leads me to question one of the biggest watch flops that I know of, and I shared this with Mike, was in the movie Argo.
Yes.
And you can clearly see that the Submariner was a modern piece. I believe actually it was a ceramic bezel.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, either this is his personal watch, because that's the best explanation, is that it's his personal watch and nobody caught it, because if it did come from the props department, then someone screwed up royally.
It's his own watch 100%.
Okay.
Well, this has actually been a topic of discussion on multiple forums. How would that slip? How did that happen?
Basically what would happen is, you have an actor who owns a watch. He's wearing his watch every day. And someone like Affleck or any of those big stars, you get a little intimidated when you're in those kinds of departments because you never want to make the wrong suggestion.
Right.
The film business is really fickle. While it can be the most rewarding business and everyone says, oh my God, you're making entertainment and it's so great, it's also really an anxiety-ridden business where people are, in tailspins all the time and we work 16 to 18 hours a day. It's not your average everyday job. If you think you're going to go to work for 40 hours a week and go home to your kids, forget about it. The people that work in those departments are not going to tell Ben Affleck, hey, listen, pal, we're taking that Rolex off your wrist and we're going to put on this, 1970, whatever year the Argo was supposed to be in, I think 79. But let's say you're a director. If I was a director and I loved watches, I would absolutely pay attention to what was on the wrist, especially if I'm doing a period piece.
Absolutely.
But most people don't know.
Right.
You don't know. It looks like a black watch. Who knows what the hell it is? And then you don't also think there are people out there on the internet that are going to look at this and critique it. You don't go to that secondary thought. So I'll give you another good example. In that vein of, what the hell were they thinking? If you look at the movie, let's take The Deer Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
There is a famous scene where they're gambling, they're on the table and all the watches are in the middle. And there's a completely counterfeit GMT.
No kidding.
Wow.
Completely. It is not even close. First of all, I'll just say this. It has the fucking date, like the words, like a day date in the watch with a GMT bezel. Okay.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's completely ridiculous. Okay. Now, Did the props department or whoever was dealing with the watches go to, I don't know, Canal Street and buy 20 watches and put them in the movie? Maybe. A lot of these people have kits that they've accumulated over years and they just kind of hand them out. Or maybe this was the set deck department that put them all down and just kind of made a pile of watches. And it just so happened that this damn GMT, root beer GMT, is like focused. I mean, it's like literally placed as if someone said, wait a second, hold the roll. Let's just move that GMT right so we can see everything that's wrong with it. Right. and that's an example of, does anyone know? Who knows? I'm sure someone's talking about it somewhere, something, but the average person has no clue. And certainly the guys that are in those departments, they have no idea.
They're going to know now.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. I hope to God that The Deer Hunter is available on Netflix, because I am about to go through the entire movie just to get that screenshot so that I can post it on Instagram.
I was thinking the same thing. I hope it's on Amazon Prime. It just so happens that, as usual, we're running out of time here at On Time, and we very much enjoyed our time with this Vancouver film producer. Brought us a little bit closer, a little bit cooler, which we definitely need because of the heat down here in Southern California.
We have a couple of different expectations from him. Definitely, he has to bring the Vancouver spotted prawns next time he's down in Los Angeles.
Yes.
I can do that.
Also, go ahead and bring your little goodie bag of watches or whatever it is that you want to give away. I mean, we're not going to say no.
I just would like a maple glazed, please. This episode of On Time was recorded and engineered by Michael Senderovich with supervision by Tim Hatayama.
Team OTP is Kenshu Production and Savada and Dune on social media.
Our theme song was composed and recorded by Hubie Wang.
For the entire OTP team, this is Mike.
And this is Chase. Thank you for listening to On Time.